The dictator is panicking, peace talks are falling apart in his hands. The Kremlin has issued 3 untouchable demands that destroy the very idea of peace. These are not negotiations, it is fear. Putin is stalling, hiding his defeats behind fake ultimatums and trying to push his own plan to save himself from a collapse on the battlefield. And then a new blow to Moscow. Macron is flying to China to personally ask Xi Jinping to pressure Putin and break his resistance. Will the Kremlin lose its last chance? Is Putin scared that the world is already negotiation without him? And is this the beginning of the end of his blackmail? This is Ukraine Today. I'm Zoroslava Kolesnikova. Friends, stay with us. It's only getting hotter. Negotiations on the verge of collapse. Putin is in panic. The Kremlin is trying to stall, manipulate and rewrite the rules of the game. But the US and Ukraine are trading off their masks. Why is the dictator abandoning the latest peace plan and what is the hidden? Russia has once again put on the diplomatic show declaring its readiness for peace, but in reality it is just an attempt to seize the initiative that imposes its game on the West. Sky News writes about this, revealing the behind-the-scenes of the visit of the American delegation to Moscow and the Kremlin's real motives. According to Sky News, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were given a VIP reception.
The Kremlin accepted them as tourists, not partners.
But behind all the tear tricks was a cold reality. The Kremlin didn't not even plan to hold substantive peace negotiations. The dictator hardly refuses to give in because he believes he will win the war and can dictate the terms, and on the eve of the US visit, Moscow hastily announced the capture of Pokrovsk. It was a political show designed to demonstrate strength before negotiations.
It was a message that was meant to strengthen the Kremlin's demands, not weaken them.
Putin believes that Washington is distancing itself from Europe and is tired of war. Americans are constantly traveling to Moscow while Putin is not taking any steps toward it. This gives the dictator the impression that the US is ready to listen and NATO is weakening. Putin is trying to manipulate the US against the EU.
This is part of the Kremlin's strategy to distance the US from Europe, weaken NATO and bring Washington closer to Moscow.
That is, Putin is playing hospitality with the US and threatening Europe. The Kremlin wants to regain control. Moscow wants to impose the old plan on the US, which effectively freezes the war on the Putin storm. There is no peace for just peace there, only the demands of the Russian Federation. Amid the negotiation, Putin is demonstratively blaming Europe, trying to show fictional success on the front, pretending that he is the only peacemaker. But the simple truth is that he is panicking because time is working against him. The US is already declaring progress. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said,
"There is progress, but the goal has not yet been achieved."
The same signal was transmitted of the Kremlin, but in a different tone. Ushakov was forced to admit that Russia preserves some of the US ideas sharply negatively, that therefore the negotiations have stalled.
Only Putin can end this war, but he is the main obstacle to peace.
Putin is not giving in because he is afraid of real negotiation, because they will show the weakness of the Russian Federation. But the new stage of negotiations is already turning against the Kremlin. Moscow has lost control of the process and is now trying to save face somehow. Putin is in panic. The Kremlin has made 3 scared demands that will completely destroy any peace talks. The dictator is afraid, stalling for time and trying to hide his own defense behind ultimatums that are doomed to fail. The Russian regime has sent a signal to the US: no compromise, only Ukraine surrender, and this is how the Kremlin position is described in the NBC News article. Putin is disrupting the negotiations before they even begin. putting forward conditions that are impossible for either Kiev or the West to accept. Embassy confirmed that Putin, through his representative, stated that there are 3 points that the Kremlin will not give up under any circumstances: complete and voluntary withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from Donetsk and Lugansk region, limitation of the size of the Ukrainian army, official recognition by the US and EU of the occupied territory as Russian.
There are 3 pillars on which we will not compromise, said the Russian official who wished to remain anonymous: the territory of Donbass, restrictions on the armed forces of Ukraine, and recognition of the territories by America and Europe.
Putin is making unrealistic demands not because he is strong, but because he is panicking. Sanctions pressure is growing. China, Turkey, Central Asia are moving away from Moscow. The Kremlin is trying to pass off weakness as strength. An ultimatum is a peace plan. American steps and Russian soil. Kremlin panics and pushes its own peace plan. US officials have once again set foot on Russian territory, and the Kremlin immediately launched a diplomatic counterattack. Moscow is preparing to force its own version of a peace plan for Ukraine, harsh, one-sided, and dangerously beneficial only to Putin. The Kremlin is betting it can pressure Washington into pushing Kyiv. But the real question is it already too late? Will the United States make concessions to a dictator? Stay with us, the most tense stage of the geopolitical game is just beginning.
The Americans have visited Russia again. They were met at Vnukovo by Putin's special representative Kirill Dmitriev. The Kremlin is preparing to push its own version of a peace plan for Ukraine.
There is a process underway. The process is a serious one. Just now, Putin said that he would inform Lukashenko about how things stand on this track. Right now, there is probably nothing more important than this. Of course, there will be many people who won't shy away from anything to disrupt this process.
The day before, Stephen Witkoff took part in a meeting between the American delegation and representatives of Ukraine in Florida.
We don't just want to decisively end the ongoing war, we also profoundly want to help Ukraine achieve enduring and robust lasting security so that it never, ever has to face another devastating invasion again in the future. The negotiations were productive, but more work is still needed.
Some progress was noted, however, no concrete agreements were reached.
We are already halfway to ensuring Ukraine's independence. Today, we made significant progress. Russia must become part of the equation for a Ukrainian settlement. For this, Witkoff will travel to Moscow.
American journalists are speculating that this time Trump has sent an unusual team of negotiators to Russia: Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
While the Trump administration is hastily seeking to conclude a peace agreement to end the war in Ukraine, President Donald Trump is sending 2 of his top diplomats to Moscow. They are his former business partner and his son-in-law. And neither of them has been confirmed by Senate lawmakers.
There are rumors in the White House that with this move, Trump is showing his preference for personal diplomacy over bureaucracy. The US president believes that it is Witkoff and Kushner who are supposedly capable of closing the deal.
Since the Moscow authorities are justifiably proud of what they have accomplished for the development of the capital in recent times.
Who is the negotiator on the Russian side? Putin himself spoke about this.
When we actually sit down at the negotiating table and start to seriously and specifically discuss each of the proposed points for discussion, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs represents our country. And from the administration side, it's Vladimir Rostislavovich Medinsky, the presidential aide, who has been handling this from the very beginning. Also, for current matters and to organize all this work, I have involved my aide as well, Yuri Viktorovich Ushakov. He is in contact with his American colleagues, but he can't do all of this alone. This is something the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should handle, and partly the presidential administration as well. It's a huge, very complex set of issues that need to be discussed, documented, properly formulated, and all the details need to be clarified.
At the press conference, the Kremlin dictator stated that one of the key topics would be the status of Crimea and Donbass. Then he got even more inspired and blurted out, "The Russian Federation is ready to go to war with Europe."
We are not planning to go to war with Europe. I've said this 100 times already. But if Europe suddenly wants to fight us and starts, We are ready right now.
Before Witkov's negotiations in Moscow about the peace plan, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the issue of territories is the most difficult one.
I'll be frank, the territorial issue is the most difficult one. The issue of money and reconstruction, in my opinion, and I'm being honest of course, is hard and difficult to resolve without the presence of European partners, because the money is in Europe. I think that's not very fair. And the issue of security guarantees, which is very important, specifics from the US, specifics from Europe.
According to media reports, the initial version of the plan, which consisted of 28 points, mentioned recognizing Ukrainian territory as belonging to Russia and the possibility of withdrawing the Ukrainian armed forces even from those parts of Donetsk region that the occupiers had not managed to seize. Ukraine has repeatedly called this unacceptable. European allies of Ukraine have also opposed such steps. The visit of the American envoys to discuss peace is already the sixth one. The previous visit was at the end of summer. At that time, the meeting took place against the backdrop of an ultimatum that Donald Trump issued to the Kremlin. Disappointed by the lack of progress in resolving the war in Ukraine, the head of the White House first gave Putin 50 days, then 10, to achieve a ceasefire.
We have agreed on serious security guarantees, which I would describe as game-changing. We did not expect to get so close to an agreement on Article 5 protection from the United States, or to a legislative commitment in the RSF not to encroach on other territories after the peace agreement is codified. So we have reached an agreement, and that's not all.
Since then, nothing has changed except for the tightening of sanctions. Putin has decided to continue his bloody war in Ukraine.
Macron flies to Beijing. Will China finally pressure to Putin to end the war? A new diplomatic offensive against the Kremlin is underway. Emmanuel Macron is heading to Beijing with one goal: pressure Xi Jinping to push Moscow toward ending the war in Ukraine. Paris hopes China will stop the Kremlin and help break the deadlock in the peace process. Beijing is one of the very few partners whose opinion Putin cannot openly ignore. But will China agree to pressure Moscow? Is Xi ready to step into the role of global arbiter of the war? All the key details coming up next.
Macron will ask China to put pressure on Putin. This Wednesday, the president of France plans to visit Beijing, and during his trip, he wants to once again ask Xi Jinping to influence Russia to end the war in Ukraine. This was stated by the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot. This upcoming visit to China will be Macron's fourth since he came to power in France.
Russia's economy is in fact far too dependent on its cooperation with China. The vast majority of the oil that is exported via extensive pipelines mainly goes to Europe, but a significant portion also goes to China. And China buys huge volumes of oil, significantly more than what Europe can purchase. Let's look at the estimates for the first quarter of this year. It's actually 51.7%.
The visit of the Chinese foreign minister to Moscow for talks with his Russian counterpart hardly seems coincidental. Interfax reports that the two sides are holding consultations on issues of strategic security and military cooperation. Moreover, this is happening on the very same day that US Special Envoy Steve Witkov is meeting with the Kremlin's dictator, Vladimir Putin.
China, of course, has its own interests. First of all, China wants to make money and not spend it on Russia. Secondly, as was said, or rather, to be precise, as the South China Morning Post, a Hong Kong newspaper, wrote, Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, said at a meeting with Kaja Kallas, the EU's chief diplomat, that China does not want the war in Ukraine to end. In other words, China doesn't want either side to win. Xi
Jinping called for a swift peace during a conversation with US President Donald Trump. Was that sincere? That's the question. It's rhetorical. However, it's not far from the truth that benefits China.
China doesn't want any successes on the peace track. Accordingly, the capitulation of Ukraine is unacceptable to Ukraine, but in essence, it would put an end to this war. A bad end for Ukraine and for China as well. That doesn't suit them.
China creates the appearance of supporting Russia while actually nurturing the idea of how to absorb it.
China understands that Russia's economic problems will lead to difficulties in providing for the country's regions. First and foremost, this will concern finances, especially in regions far from Moscow. The regions far from Moscow are those that are very close to China. Moreover, some of them were once part of China, even before Open Up World. That's why China understands that this problem with financing and the disintegration of Russia, in essence, the collapse of the Soviet Union 2.0, only this time the collapse of Russia, will lead to China expanding its territory. simply because places like Tuva and other regions, they will remember that they were once part of China and will simply want to be under China's umbrella again in order, let's say, to continue their normal economic activities or to be more oriented toward Beijing than toward Moscow.
Besides the issue of territories lost by Russia, for China it's also a matter of dividing up political influence in the world, a sphere in which Moscow was hit hard by the invasion of Ukraine and which only continues to diminish with each year of the war.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you believe the truth must be louder than the Kremlin lies, like, share and subscribe. Your support keeps us on the information front line. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine.